Hi, everyone, and welcome to our CPQ office hours with Original Shift. My name is Tori Beeler. I'm going to be your moderator for today's webinar. We're just going to give everyone a couple minutes to join, kind of come on into the office hours here. We'll go over a little housekeeping. We'll be answering all the questions that you guys submitted upon registration. Just sit patiently. We're going to get started in just a minute. Okay, awesome. So we're going to go ahead and just kind of kick it off. If you've been with us before, you already know how our webinars work. So just a few housekeeping items. If you haven't been with us before, I'm going to walk you through the platform so you know how to communicate back and forth with us. So as you know, you are muted. So the only way that you can communicate with us currently is through that questions tab that you should see on the side of your screen. So you should have that dashboard that gives your audio and your questions. Just so that we know that you guys can hear us okay, go ahead and write in, happy Tuesday, happy to be here. Hi, hello, where are you guys in the world? I'm currently in San Francisco, California. Just let us know where you're at. Let us know you can hear us okay. And this is also how you're going to be submitting questions throughout this if you haven't submitted them upon registration. So as you guys know, we asked for your questions early. We have them all loaded up. We're going to answer as many as possible. I see a couple people from the Philippines. Hi, upstate New York, from Texas. Wonderful. Hello, hello. Perfect. Okay, so like I said, this is how you guys are going to be communicating with us. We're really happy that you're here with us today. We're going to answer all the questions that you submitted upon registration first, and then at the end, we're going to answer the questions that you have submitted during this session. We don't have any polls today for you guys, so we're going to go ahead and skip that part. But I do want to go ahead and introduce our speakers for today's webinar and for our office hours. So first we have Derek Black. And Derek is our Director of Customer Success. He came to us last year from Salesforce, and he's been a major player in the quote-to-cash space since 2011. He's been the solution architect for over 150 Salesforce CPQ go-lives and impacted hundreds, if not thousands, of happy customers. He has trained many of Salesforce's own customer success specialists, and his knowledge is highly sought after. And after that, next we have Joe Jagazar. Joe is a managing partner and senior solutions architect at Original Shift. He literally wrote the Salesforce CPQ specialist certification exam. So great person to have on today. He has over 10 years of experience working in Salesforce, as well as 6 years and specifically for CPQ. Both of these speakers have a plethora of knowledge to share with you guys today, and they are excited to go over all the questions that you've already submitted. I also want to talk really quickly about why we chose Original Shift as our guests for today's office hours. So Original Shift was founded by some of the original CPQ and billing leaders, and since then they've carefully built a team of experts. Every Original Shift architect has at least 3 years of CPQ and billing experience, with the average being of more than 5. In addition to the product expertise, the Original Shift team of consultants works in the trenches with clients to build efficient and effective solutions that shift the way clients are doing business. So obviously we have a ton of knowledge here for you guys today. We love the questions that you submitted, and we're going to answer them in a very particular order. So we're going to go over a little bit about prepping for CPQ, a few general questions, into a few different specific topics that all of you guys have asked about, and then at the end we'll do more general questions. So preparing for CPQ. The first question that we have is from Tony. And it's, what is the best way to prepare for an upcoming Salesforce CPQ implementation project? And I want Joe to start off with this, since this is really in his wheelhouse. So Joe, whatever knowledge you want to impart, please do.
Thanks, Tori. Yeah, this is something very near and dear to my heart. And I think probably the biggest key to success in a CPQ project. Prepping for a CPQ implementation isn't just about the technology stack or can I get a product catalog. It is more of a program problem than anything else. Anyone that's implementing CPQ is looking to fundamentally change their business. They're not just looking to swap out some old tool and put in this CPQ tool. And so with that comes a lot of business process change. And so in prepping for that, I think it's very key to having the team, the internal customer team, define their success metrics. What are those project principles, success metrics? What are we going after? And then also identifying the other work streams. It's very rare to see that it's just CPQ going into place. There's usually contract data that needs to be transformed, integrations are changing, sales models are changing, and with that comes comp model changing. So all of these things need to work in concert, and it's really putting together a very good program definition and RACI matrix of who is owning what's the detail in this work stream, and what are the dependencies and prerequisites. We usually give a RACI matrix and a dependencies matrix to customers as part of our initial onboarding of them to help them start thinking about and defining those things. Some of them are very CPQ specific, like pricing. You need to have some pricing workbooks, some pricing calculators stood up so we can help set that up in CPQ. And then I think the other side of that, like I said, is all the other pieces. Integration and data comes to mind first, because those are, in my opinion, the two hardest things to do and what will usually hold up a CPQ project. I know Derek has some materials that he's put together, and I think they're out there for free, if I'm not mistaken, Derek.
Yeah, so when I worked at Salesforce, I was in charge of creating a lot of content that are called accelerators, which are available to certain levels of Salesforce customers, where you can, learn about different things as starting a project, selecting the right kind of partner, and learning more about individual feature areas. That if you came to the call I did like 2 weeks ago, I see CPQ as having like 8 really important functional areas that you need to plan and think about. So those are available to Salesforce customers. There's a lot of free webinars, free accelerators that you can take advantage of. And I think like the best way to prepare is just make sure that you have people that have done this before and have proven results, because there's a lot of missteps you can easily make throughout the process. So having someone that's done it before and actually listening to them is really useful. They're not asking for, certain people in your company to be involved for no reason. Like if me as a consultant, I would prefer to just get everything done with no meetings if I could. I'm not asking, to talk to people in finance or people in marketing for no reason. Like there's a lot of people that need to be involved. There's a lot of strong decisions you're going to make. And Job said something around the lines of, hey, you're not just swapping in one product for another. You truly aren't, even if that is what you're doing. We've seen plenty of people say, hey, I want to get off of Oracle, I want to get off of Aptus or whatever, and move to Salesforce CPQ. You are fundamentally changing how a really important part of your business works, and you want to take advantage of the differences there, and you're going to have to evaluate a lot more than just make this thing do what we did before. If you want something to do what you're doing before, why did you even buy something new? Consider like why you're changing, and like try to eliminate some of the things that were maybe problematic before.
Nice. Perfect. So Tony, if we've answered your question, hopefully that gave you a lot of steps on how to prepare, how to get ready for this. We're going to move on to the next question. So this one comes from Douglas, and it's, can you fully explain the process for amendments, and are there any plans to simplify?
I guess I can start with this. So the concept of amendments is something that I have spent hundreds and hundreds of hours of my life talking about. And it's really kind of mysterious to some people, but in the context of Salesforce CPQ, the simplest way to think of an amendment is I need to add something to a contract and have it expire as the rest of the original contract. So say I bought 100, software licenses on January 1st, and my contract runs to December 31st. It's May now, and I know that in June I need 50 more of these software licenses. You would use an amendment to simply, just add 50 more licenses, and it'd be at the same price, and it would end at that contract. So you simply just have kind of one renewal event there. That's the most simple layer of amendments that you would ever do. Amendments are there to just keep things co-termed. If you're not doing co-terms, or by making sure you have a single contract or very few contracts that all end on the same date, then you're not doing amendments. And if you are creating a lot of different contracts with all a bunch of different end dates, you might actually want to consider doing amendments to make your life easier. As far as like plans to simplify the amendment process, there's actually so much functionality like built in there that it's not necessarily like simplifying the process. It's more probably deciding at a managerial level what you're going to do with amendments. When do you want to co-term? When do you want to maybe cancel and replace a contract? So those are the things to really consider as now working in customer success and being really peripheral to renewals and like having people enter longer agreements. From that standpoint, I would almost rather always do kind of an early renewal, cancel and replace, like extend out the end date and not do an amendment as often, just from a business standpoint. Like if we can do, if I can take that deal that was slated to end in January or in December and move it to next July, I would much rather do that. So probably the way to simplify the amendment process is to really map out the strategy that you want to do in managing contracts, how you want to potentially add on to those contracts or not, and when you want to do a co-term versus an early renewal. Really just understanding how you want your business to operate and nailing that down first will allow you to craft the experience in CPQ to meet what's expected. I think oftentimes people just build out contracts, renewals, amendments, and they don't really consider strategically how they want to use them. And that's what makes it really complicated.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I think amendments and renewals seem to come a lot for folks as an afterthought to how do I implement my new business scenarios. And when to your point earlier, amendments at its core level is actually pretty simple, in my opinion, and to my knowledge, with working with the Salesforce product team, there's no plan changes to change that functionality. Because all it is a creation of a new subscription that is the change in your contract, and that's really what you're doing. I will say where they get complex is around all the other things you need to think about on an amendment. Well, if you don't want something to be coterminous, how do you deal with that? By default, amendments are coterminous. If you want to do something different, it's a contract cancellation or a rewrite. If I want to sell the same subscription at a different price point, this is a common one, and it's not as easy as just, oh well, I'm just going to change the price. You've already sold these licenses at one price point. If you want to sell more licenses at a different price point, it's thinking about that downstream scenario of renewals. what happens on renewals? Because you don't then renew at two sets licenses at two different prices. Do you average out your unit price? What happens to that renewal to make it make sense for the customer and for your business? So then that's where the complexity, in my opinion, that amendments really comes in and makes them not simple.
Perfect. So I think we can say that the mystery of amendments has now been solved and we're good to go and move forward. So Elena asks a great question. And Elena, if you're wondering, I know you're on right now, if you're wondering where the rest of your question is, don't worry, we have it in the notes section. We have all the background information that you provided to us. But the question is, what is the best way to use one product set and make those products prices editable for some users, but not for others?
Go ahead, Joe.
I was gonna say, I think this is a pretty straightforward one. You can create a formula field on your quote to pull in profile or role, depending on how you want to control making that price editable, and use that as a condition in a price action to change the quote line field price editable on and off to set it true and false, and that will make it editable for some users and uneditable for other users.
Perfect. Gary, do you have anything to add?
No, just in general, like there's a lot that you can do with price rules that are more than, you know, updating a discount or something like that. You can enable a lot of different controls on, you know, visibility and functionality of quote lines, and just kind of keep that in mind. So yeah, it's kind of simple once you start thinking of ways to, you know, check boxes and little things here that control stuff for overall CPQ.
Perfect.
Yeah, a majority of the product setup fields, I would argue probably in order of 80–90% of them are available as quote line fields for you to modify at the time of quoting, dependent on any other external account setup, opportunity setup, user profiles.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys. So Elena, if we've answered your question, just write it into the questions area. Let us know that you're good to go. Next question comes from Deidre, and please let me know if I pronounce that right. But how do you add addition/upsell a bundle without having to remove the bundle and add another, which makes it look like product churn?
Yeah, I think I'll go for it.
So with this, there's maybe a couple layers of this question that we need to get to. So to add additions, upsell a bundle without having to remove the bundle, I'm not sure if this refers to managing a product catalog and configuration level, or to managing like existing agreements through amendments and renewals, that type of thing. Maybe it's both of those. So for like, without having to remove a bundle and add another, typically you can do specific settings inside of the bundle to use product rules to maybe hide deprecated products, or, you know, add in new products that are going to be a part of that. Take that into consideration of how this makes it look like product churn. If you are doing like swap and replace or upsells or something like that, you really are changing the, you know, install base of your customer or whatever they own. So you do need to take note that something has changed in that agreement. So if kind of moving from the concept of how you manage this at a product level to how you manage this at a contract level, you know, you would use the amendment process probably to set the appropriate levels of, you know, products that someone used to own and currently owns. You can potentially use the upgrade products feature, which is very rarely actually used in CPQ, to kind of ensure that the swap is kind of meeting everything that you want, and you know, adjusting commercially to a degree. Like you can put in the price difference from moving from one tier to another if you're using the upgrade products, as well as provide like credit or kind of debit SKUs if you're moving down a level. That would be something to consider.
Yep. I said, you know, I read this as a little bit about like product additions. You've got some marketing solution package, and it comes in different flavors, your basic, premium, and enterprise. And we typically see there that you don't want to change the entire solution. You just want to change from starter, or, you know, basic to premium. And you don't want that to look like you're churning the entire bundle. And so in that instance, we usually approach that through configuration attributes, adding that a pick list to the top of that marketing solution to say, what version of this are you purchasing, and having that attribute driven through product rules change out the underlying kind of configuration of that bundle. And that way, if you amend it and change solution set, you're not churning the entire bundle. You are churning some features inside that bundle to move from one product or one addition to the next, but it doesn't look like an entire product churn.
Okay, thank you. So the next question that we do have comes from Srini, and it's asking to explain and discuss product search with dynamic quote line editor. But Srini, we don't have enough information to answer this. So I see that you're on currently. If you could just give us a little bit more information about what you're asking about specifically, we'll come back to it. So the next question is from Gabriel. And can we have evergreen subscription products with MDQ?
I think the short answer is no. There is some super technical stuff that you maybe could do in the background, but I would never advise it unless you really wanted to get into customizing Salesforce and the CPQ product.
Yeah, I would just say, you know, the concept of evergreen is that you are setting kind of a single amount that's going to be perpetual, basically. That, you know, it's evergreen, and this really just ties into a billing process where, you know, it's kind of like auto renew, or you kind of maybe pay a flat price and you just always have this product. The concept of MVQ is a little off there, because you would be saying that this agreement is changing over some time periods. So it doesn't quite fit that model. And if you are interacting with customers where they're going to be changing their subscription level often, you typically have specific cutoff dates for those, you know, changes in level, which Evergreen doesn't have an end date, so it's a little odd there. And on top of that, like MDQ, you're always doing some type of ramped pricing or quantity level. And typically how I see this working in business processes is like, hey, I just want to present this and kind of get a concept of a rough deal and kind of set some future pricing levels. But in reality, all of these agreements end up getting kind of ripped up and amended through the life of them anyway. Like, you know, you say, oh, in year one, I want 100 subscriptions. In year two, I want 200. Well, usually there's going to be some negotiation that's like, oh, I actually need 175 for year two. And, you know, it's rare that even something without quote unquote evergreen in it for MDQ is going to stay consistent through the whole term. So, you know, having evergreen inside of MDQ is a little kind of strange concept. Also, I would just never recommend using MDQ unless you have specific use cases where you really truly are going to hammer into those numbers for like a multi-segmented deal.
Yeah, I would agree with that. MDQ in general, we reserve, if you will, for that very specific use case, and even then, we try to limit the scope of what we engage MDQ for, just because it complicates a lot of things, not just evergreen. When you're talking about deal metrics, you don't have a consistent ARR over the course of the contract. So what's your opportunity value? Because companies that are doing recurring revenue, typically their opportunity value is reflective of recurring, not your TCV. And so do you take the average? Do you take the exiting run rate? There's a lot of questions that all of a sudden opens Pandora's box with MDQ.
Yeah, it's only kind of really good if you truly think you're gonna set this contract and it's gonna be good for the whole term. So like if you're doing quarterly ramps over a year, yeah, that might work pretty well because chances are you're just trying to get to a final price for your renewal. That's only a year out. But it's tricky to manage, and often you're dealing with people that are having kind of really undefined levels of spend and purchase with you, and you're going to end up with so many negotiation points that it's almost not worth it. It's better to just approach it and do an amendment a lot of times.
Thank you guys. And Srini added a little more color, so we're going to go back to that question. Would you please discuss, explain product search with dynamic quote line editor? And the additional information that we have is, can we use config attributes to dynamically show quote line editor? For example, for cloud products, we need different UI to collect additional information. And if the provider is AWS, we need different pick lists for the region, and for GCP/Google, we need different pick lists as well. This is like record type, different page layouts based on context for user inputs.
Yeah, so there's a couple ways you can do that. One is through what we call a page security plugin. The other is through actually what are they called? Special fields now, Derek? I forget what the new moniker for them is.
Edit lines, field set name, field.
Yeah, yeah. But there's two functions. I'll take the PSP version because I tend to do a fair bit of work in this area. Page security plugin allows me to dynamically code, and this is JavaScript based on quote line data, quote data, etc., control both the visibility and editability of fields on the page. And so I can hide fields, I can make them visible but not editable. I can do all of that through scripting in the background of a page security plugin. That's one way to control it. The other way is actually a little bit easier. I'll let Derek take that.
Yeah, so there's the ability to, it seems like you may be already aware of like a dynamic quote line editor of using the different field sets available. So if you have a specific type of deal that you're working on and you need to show certain things in truly the quote line editor, there's a special field called edit line field set name, and it will change the field set used by that Visualforce page to show the different columns involved. So that's one way to, when you're truly at the quote line level and you need to see specific things, you can do that. Honestly, it sounds like you would use, well, let's kind of step back. You would use that field set when you really have kind of one size fits all needs for all the quote lines that are going to be on a quote. And maybe they vary between business units or regions or something like that. It sounds like you're probably selling like a lot of different types of products, possibly on the same quote. And what I would recommend is that you don't try to do these kind of configurations and viewers directly inside of the quote line editor. I would consider using field sets for your bundles to show, you know, what's pertinent to those particular products and product lines. So use a quote line editor view if it's truly everything on this quote has kind of a one size fits all need. If there's some small bins on it, you would then go to what Joe is suggesting of using page security plugin to, you know, maybe make certain fields editable, not editable for those products. I think there's a newer feature with the quote line drawer and the page security plugin where you can actually like do some really dynamic stuff with the drawer for specific products. That might be really useful for you. So consider, you know, trying to use the quote line drawer for some of these things coupled with a page security plugin. But I would maybe even just try to have these values be managed on the configuration page. So in the bundle itself, use different field sets at either the product option level or even different feature levels to show what you need to do to get these set up and priced correctly.
Yep. Yeah, you can use different field sets in the option configuration. So each block of features can have different fields displayed and set. To your point, the latest stuff, I think this is what, probably 2-3 versions now with the quote line drawer where they have the compact mode, which when you hide a field through the page security plugin in the drawer, it completely wipes it off the page. So it lets you be really dynamic about the different fields that are in a quote line drawer.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. Looks like we answered his question and he's gonna try it out. So the next topic that we're talking about is ID mapping. Couple of people submitted questions with that similar topic. So the first one comes from Natasha, and we're really struggling with managing ID mapping when we're trying to migrate changes made in the sandbox to production. Are there best practices for making this easier? So Derek, this is probably a good question for you to answer.
Yeah, so that's an easy question for me to answer because I work at a software company that sells a product to do that for you. So this is exactly what Prodly's kind of, you know, established product does, is it manages migration of relational data. So we would manage all the ID mapping and relationship building for you. So for example, like price rules have the main object that's a price rule, and then there are child objects of price actions, price conditions, lookup queries, and then those things might have child relationships to summary variables or potentially other custom objects that hold lookup data. So to manage that and move it from sandbox to production without Prodly, what you would need to do is do a whole lot of CSV downloads with data loader, manage, you know, a field that is like an external ID field that's populated to say that this is price rule number 1, and this is action 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is condition 1, 2, 3. And as you map over your changes, you're going to have to then re-upload those CSVs that you downloaded and put external IDs into production, as well as maybe inside of Excel or something like that, use VLOOKUPs to then take the successful loads of your top level price rules, get the known IDs into production there, and then remap everything to that new record on all the child objects. And you have to do, you know, for a fully built out price rule using all the objects, you know, like probably about 10 or 20, you know, extract loads, and then, you know, destination loads to cover everything across that with a lot of manual work in the middle. Prodly uses something. So Prodly uses something to manage this, and you really just kind of click a button that says deploy. I want to deploy all my price rules or one price rule or whatever, and it will navigate that relationship tree and manage all these relationships for you, so you don't have to do any data loading exercises on your own. So using a tool or having maybe a script built or something like that is probably the best practice. Joe, I don't know if you have some insight on doing this without Prodly or using the product.
Yeah, we can certainly talk about that. I was going to say it's standard for us to use Prodly in all our deployments, primarily because of the aspects you talked about. It's an accelerator for our customers because that whole extract, transform, relink all the objects is a 2, sometimes 3-day ordeal to do a manual migration, and Prodly brings that down to 2 hours for us on a complex project, maybe 5 hours on projects with hundreds of thousands of products. So
that,
it
hours is mostly just waiting for the loads
it's
to
watching
finish.
the screen.
Or doing other work. Whereas if you're not using this product, it's 2 to 5 hours of like going to data loader and picking every object that you need in sequence. So it's really involved work.
Yep. Outside of that, we do have customers that, for security concerns and whatnot, won't let us use Prodly because we are using our own instance of Prodly. We can't connect to their orgs through that. And so they use what we call data loader workbook, which is a giant spreadsheet with a bunch of VLOOKUPs, as you mentioned. And particularly when setting up new projects, those spreadsheets all have every object listed in the tabs, and they're all keyed through an external ID. And we are adamant through the build cycle that if it's not in this workbook, it didn't happen. If you're just going to go in the system and add a price rule, it doesn't exist, because this is the source of truth until we're done through deployment. And that was the only way to get really strict about it, kind of similar to a lot of Salesforce admins. If it doesn't happen in Salesforce, it didn't happen. We have to get strict about if it doesn't, you don't put your data in this workbook, then you didn't configure anything.
It's really interesting that they would rather have you download CSVs of all their data and have them on your desktop as a security than using a product that doesn't even store the data at all anywhere.
Yeah, it's more about giving us, well, I shouldn't say, we'll do the initial extract and give it to them to do the load. We're not allowed to touch their production environments or get logins or anything like that.
Okay. Got it.
Thank you, guys. So long story short, Natasha, I'll send you a link to our custom demo. So this is the next question. If we use CEID templates for moving, let's say, product records, where is the value of external ID stored? Which is kind of, how does it work? How do we know which one is better, BEID or CEID? Which one's better to use?
Yeah, so this is a direct, Prodly question. This isn't Salesforce CPQ. So Prodly can be used for anything in Salesforce, any set of objects. It's not a CPQ specific tool. CPQ just happens to be, one complicated thing in Salesforce that this works really well with. So the concept of a CEID template, that's something that is Prodly specific. It stands for Composite External ID. So if you're using Prodly to move records from one org to another, you need to do something to determine if I need to update a record in my destination or insert a record in my destination. So this is something to do kind of duplicate prevention, where if I find something that's the same, I'm going to do an update to it rather than create a new record. The value of an external ID for composite external ID is not actually stored anywhere. That doesn't like create a concatenation of the fields that are being used or anything like that. it's the value is determined by the record itself, and the data set mapping where you are selecting the fields that are there. It's possible to use CEID on a single field that is, external ID. And then of course you're writing to a specific field on that record that is your external ID. So the whole point of using Prodly, or one big piece of it, is that you don't have to create or store these IDs anywhere. You do have to be cognizant of what you're doing with CEID when you're setting these up to say what maps to where. Then there's this concept of virtual external ID, which doesn't use any field values or anything like that in the records at all to do duplicate prevention. What it does is, if you're following general data management best practices in an org, i.e. not just creating manual stuff in your test org, you're using Prodly to move that to dev, and you're actually doing like full refreshes at regular intervals across your stack. VEID will know where the records came from, and you don't need to use any fields or anything like that to manage the updates and inserts. It will, know that it has seen this particular record ID before. It makes kind of a big matrix of record IDs and keeps those just ID level values and knows to do the correct update or insert. Joe, do you have any comments about managing these fields or anything like that?
Yeah, I will say that for the most part, we use VEID as the IDs are managed by Prodly. CEID has its places where a customer has a strong external data, external ID management scheme. It really does help on those fronts. Using CEID as true composite of fields, we've found sometimes dangerous in that I think out of the box, some of the composite fields use like name as part of the composite, and someone will go and change a price rule name, and then you'll end up with a duplicate record. You'll end up with the initial deployment of something under one name and then another deployment of it under another name. So we certainly advocate for VEID. I think you need to be really cognizant of what you're doing if you're going to use CEID.
Yeah, so to answer that last question, we always recommend using VEID, like all the time. CEID is maybe a bridge for when you're not using or following best practice data management and you have people creating stuff manually here and there. That's, CEID can be used as a bridge to kind of get things in sync if you did something out of whack. But other than that, you want to use VEID all the time.
I think there's a question that came up around getting an initial deployment done with VEID. I think if you're already using CPQ, the way we've done that is to use Prodly for the first time to back deploy a sandbox. Take production and push it into a sandbox to get the IDs established.
Yep.
All right. Thank you, guys. So the next section of our presentation is going to be multi-currency questions. So quite a few people asked about this, so we want to dive into this topic. So Ajinka, hopefully I said your name right. I would like to know some best practices before starting the CPQ implementation in multi-currency enabled orgs.
Ooh, that's a fun one. Multi-currency enabled, and I think this also gets into whether or not you're using standard exchange rates versus dated exchange rates. You're going to have a lot more prices to define. Price books are defined on a per currency level, and I think this is something that a lot of folks kind of stumble over when they're first deploying multi-currency, in that it's not well, just take whatever I have in my USD price and Salesforce is going to apply some exchange rate multiplier and give me what my JPY price is. The the way Salesforce, the core Sales Cloud platform, has this configured is that you are defining prices in each currency. So I think that's something to be very cognizant of. And I think on the other side of that, if you're doing dated exchange rates, Sales Cloud is limited to using those dated exchange rates on opportunity effectively. You can't use them across the other objects in the same way that they're deployed on opportunity. I think those are probably my top things to think about. Derek, I don't know if you have something else.
Yeah, I would say too that Joe brought up the point that a lot of times when I've started multi-currency projects with people, they think that they're going to have some type of almost like Forex, like immediate like exchange rate thing being plugged in. And no one actually really does business like that. I mean, maybe some very small percentage of customer or, you know, people quote that way. Following the guidance and kind of guardrails of how Salesforce has implemented multi-currency itself is really a good framework to look at and kind of rationalize and understand, okay, this is why they made these decisions of, you know, having, you know, specific price books that are, you know, have specific prices for different regions. You'll want to keep that in mind and not try to really over-engineer multi-currency. And also, every time you add a currency, you're going to have to effectively define prices for it. So, you know, keep that in mind too. Like, just because you think it would be great to do business in New Zealand dollars, if you don't have anyone managing that price and you've never done it before, then maybe, you know, stick to quoting them in USD or AUD until you can kind of understand like what you want to actually quote those, why you want to quote those currencies and who's going to manage that price.
Yep. And I think the last thing, and this is not a lot of businesses operate in this way, but it is certainly a use case we found. Salesforce is a single currency architecture when it comes to how you're selling. Your opportunity, your quote are all in a single currency. So despite having multi-currency enabled, if you want to be able to quote USD and British pounds on the same quote, you have to be really creative in order to make that happen. It is not something that is supported by the core Salesforce platform.
Yeah, and you really would have to think, like, how am I getting myself in this mess and quoting anyway, that I need to do this? Is it really a necessity to close the business that I show these products and kind of different prices for regions? And if it is, are they really all in the same quote, or are these different deals that we're going after and different quotes and opportunities?
Yep.
Perfect. So the next one is, and again, so since all of these are kind of related, if we have answered it, maybe we just skip past it so that we have so many other questions to get to. But Shannon's asking, I'm managing multi-currency in CPQ. I know how to do it, but do you have any workarounds for the headache of managing load of price records in multiple currencies?
Apex. Actually, I think you can do this with flows nowadays, but not super bulkified is the problem. We have done this where customers don't want to manage the extra currencies, even though they should be. They've absolutely refused to manage the extra currencies. That on the load of the USD price, we go and grab the latest exchange rates that are in the exchange rate table and multiply the USD price and populate all the other currency prices. It does make up for some really weird prices because you have to handle rounding and stuff like that, and things to think about because like JPY has no decimals. So there are some things to think about when, you know, taking that approach, but it's the only way we've been able to simplify loading multiple currencies.
Yeah, I would say, you know, really analyze how many currencies you want to operate in and are actually using too, and don't, you know, over-engineer the system to just have too many currencies, because that adds in a lot of complexity that you probably aren't like using too often. And then of course, if it's just really managing relationships and stuff like that, you know, the Prodly product does all that in an automated fashion as well. So if you have 10 different price books and you don't like having to do all the remapping and stuff that we were talking about before, Prodly can manage that as well.
So Shannon, if we answered your question, let us know. So this one comes from Deepa. So what is the best practice to managing product pricing when multi-currency is enabled? How often should the price be updated? And how can we manage conversion rates for quotes since they do not use data exchange rates on them?
Let's see here. They don't use data exchange rates, as you mentioned. One way we've been able to get around that is using lookup price rules. We can pull down the current exchange rate and stamp that to a quote line and quote. So then you can drive formula fields off of those. Let's see here. I'm trying to see if there's any other best practices that we haven't discussed yet. How often they should be updated is really a function of your business. I've seen monthly all the way up to whenever the heck we feel like it.
Yeah, I rarely see anyone doing more than monthly updates. I have seen people do like almost like daily, which is just like a lot of overhead, and you really start essentially building almost an integration to manage that you're pulling in things. And it ties into what Joe is talking about with potentially using a separate object than price book to do a query and get the most current to date values, and using price rules or quote calculator plugin to manage that for you might be an approach if this is something you need to get in front of pretty regularly. But yeah, a lot of times multi-currency is managed by different kind of like regional sales leaders or product managers that, maybe in the US you change your price every single day, but in Germany you only change it every quarter or something like that. So you might need to adapt different strategies for different regions and different things there to get what is truly required to be competitive in different currencies.
Thank you. So before we jump into the next section, which is going to be just a pricing overview, I want to let everyone know on the call that if we haven't gotten to your question yet, because I know we only have about 8 minutes left, but if we haven't gotten to it, we will reach out to you individually and we'll answer each of those questions regardless. So maybe not on here, but we will get your questions answered. The next one comes from Karthik, and it's, can you discuss contract pricing where a discount is preserved versus the new list price being stored?
Discount is preserved versus the new list price being stored. So, contracted pricing is always, if you're using the contracted price records on account, they're always going to kind of bring in that existing price that you've agreed upon. If it meets the criteria for that to be brought in, that will be stored as a special price with special price type of contracted. If you are then asking the question of the new list price being stored, it's going to override any like list pricing that you have. So, contracted pricing will always kind of feed out whatever you have coming in from a price book or other calculations, but you can put in overrides around this if you need to. That can be managed with price rules or a quote calculator plugin. And Karthik, I think I have a meeting with you on Friday. We can talk about this a bit more. If you have any other kind of questions, or Joe, do you have any comments around this?
No, I think you covered it. The contracted pricing doesn't override the list price. It is a separate price point in the whole price waterfall. from list price to regular price, special price, customer price, etc. So it's stored in that special price field. So your list price is maintained. And to your point, if you want it to override your list price, you can use price rules to play with the pricing waterfall and move that special price around if you have to.
I think we actually have a question on the pricing waterfall maybe after this one, but Brian is asking, what is a recommended approach to set fixed rate products that should not be prorated based on the subscription term and are renewable?
This was Joe's favorite question. You can answer it.
I thought it was yours because you've been asking for product improvement.
Oh, yeah. Mine is, go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah, so we actually use this. It's a fairly common request. There's actually a 2 price rule method for doing this. You have a price rule on before calculate that changes your, actually, so I should say, first you create a checkbox or a flag on your product that says you don't want this to be prorated, but you still set it up as a subscription. And then you use price rules during the calculation sequence to change your subscription pricing to null before calculate and change it back to like fixed price on after calculate. And then you effectively have a subscription. It'll turn into a subscription. It'll renew like a subscription, but because there was no subscription pricing over the calculation period, proration doesn't happen.
Yeah, and I've been arguing for many years with the CPQ product managers to just have a disable proration checkbox on the product, because this comes up all the time, where this just costs $500 for your term. It doesn't matter if it's 9 months or 12 months, you know, that type of thing.
I will say you do have to be a little bit wary of this approach, because while it's $500 for 9 months or 12 months, if it's a 2-year contract, then folks are then get into, well, I want it to be $1,000 for 2 years, but it's $500 anything less than 12 months. So I think there are some consultative things you need to think about. It's not purely just don't prorate this product.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Next one comes from Greg, and it's, what is standard practice when a client wants to do mid-cycle upsell at a different price?
Cancel and replace. So here you would basically create a renewal quote that starts early. So there you can change, the dates that you want, and you can change the pricing. So if you truly need to kind of wipe out the agreement and start over, you want to kind of make a completely new quote. You can also sometimes, depending on the complexity of your configuration, just put a 0, use an amendment quote and put a 0 on your existing quantity, add that product again, and then put whatever quantity and change the price on it. Salesforce CPQ has some limitations on allowing price changes and amendments. And that's because it's really hard to reconcile what price you want to sell something at when you go to renew. So if I have product A and it's $50 and I have product A at $75 and there's different quantities, or when I go to renew, do I use the $50 or do I use the $75? Do I use something else? There's no way to reconcile that. So they want to make sure that you only have a single product given for a single, or a single price given for a single product if it's like a single line item. If it's multiple line items at different prices, then it works out fine. So if you want to do that, you have to kind of eliminate, if you're doing just a true price change, you're going to have to eliminate the first entity of that price somehow.
Yep, I would say that's the standard practice. It's not, sometimes it's not tenable for all sales organizations. It's something that we frequently enable for our customers, is changing price, or I shouldn't say changing price, selling at a different price. But to Derek's point, it does require us to use Apex as part of the contracting process to reconcile those prices. What will the renewable price be? Is it an average of prices? Is it the highest price? What happens to that renewal pricing? And that's something that we need to discuss with the customer.
All right. Thank you, guys. So we are kind of at the top of the hour. So we have a few more, actually we have like about 10 more questions that people had already submitted that we're definitely not going to get to. So we may have to do another session, but we are going to make sure that we answer all of your guys' questions that you did submit. We'll get you an answer. We'll get you the help you need. So make sure that you look for an email from us here in the next couple of days. Joe, Derek, I'll leave it to you guys. If I know you guys are both very busy, you probably have other meetings and things like that, but do you want to stay on and try to answer a few more questions for a little bit?
I actually have to run to another meeting. I apologize. But if you're hosting another session, more than happy to jump on.
Awesome.
Yeah, I gotta jump through.
Thank you, guys. So thank you, Joe. Thank you, Derek, so much for answering all these questions and being on today. I hope everyone had a good time and got some nuggets of information. We'll make sure that we schedule another office hours here in the upcoming future. That's on me to do. So I'll make sure to get that scheduled. And again, this has been recorded. So if you want to review this at any time, we'll send you the recording. We'll make sure that we answer questions if we hadn't answered them before. So thank you all so much, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.